Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I am AmalgamAsh, and today I'm going to be looking at the resource management menu included with RPG developer BAKIN. You can open resource management from the ever-present master menu once you've opened your project. And when you open it for the first time, you'll be presented with this splash screen with information that you can choose not to show the next time you go into resource management. This section manages all the resources or data, such as graphics and sound, that appear in the game. All external resources that can be added at various locations within BAKIN are also managed in this section. Of course, you can also add the resources from this section. The data managed on this section can be broadly divided into terrains, 3D stamps and the models and motions that comprise them, and a 2D stamps and the data they contain, as well as other data such as sound. Terrains are the resources that form the foundations of the maps. You can create new terrains by specifying the graphics of the terrain and the effects when the casts are on the terrain. In BAKIN, objects that can be placed directly on the maps with the pen tool basically take the form of stamps. A stamp represents the integration of several elements, such as model, motion, texture, or image. Each resource can be assigned as stamps so that they will appear in the map editor's stamps palette. Resource management is a very multifunctional screen, so it is not necessary to understand every detail at first. However, each resource can be controlled in terms of its appearance and function, so if you want to tweak the game in more detail, you can see how each one works. As always, if you're not sure what to do, please refer to the manual on the RPG Builder BAKIN official site. Some of the terminology has changed since this slightly older build, so we'll keep the box checked for Do Not Show next time and hit OK. And I'll just go ahead and maximize this screen. A note on the UI that you are seeing, I am at a resolution of 1920 by 1080. If your resolution is higher, the UI will appear smaller. You can resize various elements of the user interface to make it more readable or accessible. So we'll go through each of the categories under Resource Menu, and we'll start with Terrains. Here you can add new collections of terrains by importing them using the Add button. And so here's where you can view the various groups of terrains that you have in your game, and we've got a couple of folders by default included with this project, named Sample Game, which contains 4 different tiles, and Reserved, which contains 3 more folders, Color Block, which contains 9 tiles, 128, which contains a number of high-resolution tiles, and 64, which contains a number of lower-resolution tiles. When you click on a tile, you will be able to see its properties under the Terrain Model Attributes section. We can select each of these to view it in greater detail using the preview in the center of the screen. At the bottom of the Terrains section, there is a spot for management tags. You can assign each one of these tiles its own tag, or tags. These are reserved tiles, so they are not editable, but if we go back to the sample game tiles, we are able to edit the properties of these. So on the right side of the screen, we have Terrain Model Attributes, and everything that we can change about our terrain tiles here. Under the Name section, we're able to actually rename the tile. Under Basic, we are reminded where on the PC the file and folder are located. The unit size of the texture that is used for the terrain is set to 128 by default on this tile. We can set what material map this uses. We currently have a default selection of flat, none, marble, metal, noise, and metal with noise. We can also set the normal map and mask map. For special settings, we can choose whether this is terrain, stairs, or slope, and the texture for stairs, normal map, and mask map for stairs. We can also change the map generation color type. If you don't know what this means, you can leave it set to default, but you can choose between red, green, and blue, or any combination of the 2 colors from the 3. And this has a lot to do with the appearance of the map file and how it will be interpreted by BAKIN to display the final result. We have an option for repeating method, although it seems we only have repeat bottom, repeat middle to choose from here. Under Attributes, we can set whether this tile is traversable or not. We can set whether it counts as liquid or not. When the liquid attribute is enabled, the terrain is rendered at a slightly lower level than other terrain of the same elevation. We can choose whether or not to set rounded corners, and we can actually choose what sound effect to play when the character steps on this terrain. And this one even has a default sound assigned to it. Very cool feature. We can also apply state changes when the character steps on this terrain. So you could, for example, make a poison tile that poisons the player character when they step on it. The next selection in the menu is 3D stamps, and it has several subcategories. Essentially, you are allowed to select any 3D object in the editor, and it looks like there are a couple of different properties depending on what we select, so we'll explore that a bit. We'll now look at the right side of the screen, and we'll pull that in just to make it easier to see. Before I forget, the 3D objects also have management tags, and it looks like some of these actually have their own tags applied. Hashtag 3D has been applied to what looks like all of these. All right, back to the Buildings tab so we can look at the rendering stamp settings. You can change the name of each 3D object as well as the graphic. You can toggle a subgraphic, although I'm not sure what that means yet, as well as accurate collision. Now, when you import your model, you will have the option to use accurate collision or simple collision. We'll take a look at settings for both. We can also set whether the object overwrites non-traversable terrain. If checked, when this is placed as an object, this object can be walked over regardless of the traversable attribute of the terrain. So this does make sense for things like bridges. Now, the simple collision settings are applied to this object. We have the ability to change the shape of the collision from box to sphere to capsule to mesh to vehicle, and we can change the capsule axis from X to Y to Z. We can see the mesh model name as well as its XYZ positions, rotations, and size. So it looks like we're able to translate, rotate, and scale the object right here in the editor to change its default settings whenever we stamp it out onto the maps. You can apply motion names and settings here. So we'll be sure to take a look at something that has motion in a little bit. And you can change the materials used. Now, if we change this setting on accurate collision and toggle it on, our simple collision becomes accurate collision instead. And we have physics settings, which completely replace our simple collision settings. Double-clicking on any object allows us to view it in detail using the preview in the center of the screen. And we can actually see the shape of the collider itself. So the shape of the collision is mesh, and it actually outlines the mesh. All right, so exploring a bit, I have found a model that has sub-graphics applied, and I can see now that the model is actually a grouped collection of different models called sub-graphics, each one with its own set of attributes. So you can attach multiple models together to create a stamp, and you can change the scale and the relative coordinates and the relative angles of each of them. You can also specify the attach node. This seems to be a slightly advanced feature that we'll be sure to go over in a later episode. The rendered stamps settings menu still applies for the entire stamp, regardless of what subgraphics you have selected or specified. Just another preview of this time a private dwelling. No subgraphics. Accurate collision is turned on. And now it is clear to me what physics setting is. Physics setting is the ability to manually set the collision based on the position of the model onto this grid. This would be extremely similar to setting the collision of all of your objects in Smile Game Builder with things like different elevations and allowing underpass. I have a feeling we'll get to that in the physical settings used for 3D stamps. For now, let's take a look at some living entities. We can actually set the collision for our enemies. We can view the various animations here. You can use the controls up top to play the motion, pause the motion, or view or hide the specified collision. A capsule collision on the bat enemy. Here's the goblin enemy. The evil spirit, a rat. I love him. Most of these seem to have capsule collision by default. Moving into models next. And this mainly just allows us to preview the models, change their name, and materials. So what happens if I choose a completely different material for this model, click Add and Exit, it changes the texture of this model to something else in the editor. Now that was not a good example of how to use that, but this can be a very powerful feature because you are allowed to copy and paste assets, effectively duplicating them here in the editor. You could create several variations of a single enemy right here in the editor by selecting different materials for the same enemy. Now you could do the same with things like furniture or buildings or terrain. Next we'll look at motions. Here we have a beautiful default asset of a spinning crystal. We can change the name of it here, and we can add or remove motions from this. Here is one of our brand new treasure boxes. and its 3 default animations: keep, close, open, and keep open. That's a great animation for opening that treasure chest. You can specify the start and end frames here, as well as determine whether or not they loop, toggle the composition, and even give them internal names. So that means everything can be done here. No more messing around with the DEF files, such as in Smile Game Builder. You can also add or delete movement nodes to disable, rotation or scale nodes. More advanced features that we'll be looking at later. Just another preview of another one of the beautiful models that comes with BAKIN. The classic iron fence door and mansion door, each with its own animations. For physical settings, we are able to select various objects, play and pause motions if desired, and change the properties of their physics on the map. We can change the name as well as the name of its physical setting, in this case collision, the attached node, which in this case is defaulted to root, and we'll just leave that to the default for now. We can change the shape, of course, and the type of collider. We have collision, rigid body, kinematic, trigger, and control types. We have a lot of physics settings to access. This is all new territory for RPG development software from smileboom. We can change the mass, the friction, and the restitution, as well as the linear damping and the angular damping. We can toggle the accessory option on or off if you use this object as a shaking thing or collision for shaking things. And of course, change the capsule axis and collision position, rotation, and scale. You can toggle on or off whether to use 6-axis degree of freedom constraints. The tooltip says it is possible to make a rigid body behave as if it were hanging from another rigid body or kinematic. Those of you who are familiar with Unity might be able to delve right into this from the beginning and make use of it. But if you turn the setting on, you can set the parent rigid body, pivots, minimum slide and maximum slide limits, and rotation limits. You can also set the X, Y, and Z axis slide spring and rotation springs. There are a lot of settings for physics here. Next, we have the particles option under 3D stamps. We're able to view the properties of the various 3D particles. It is very important to note that BAKIN supports effectsier animations, and you can even see the logo in the lower left corner of the preview section. The sound is playing in the background as we view the animation. And we can change the sound effect here, as well as the pre-warm, the toggle of environmental effects, the timing of the sound effect playback, and the effect play time. We can change the properties of this when it is used for battle. We can change its generated position as target or user, its target position, gravitational force, its orientation. We have a lot of other settings that we can change for battle effects. We can also change how this is linked to local lights. Just a ton of customization. Next, under materials, we have access to all of the materials used in this default project, and we can of course add more. Some of the UI in this older version of BAKIN is still in Japanese. You can specify the texture right here from the engine. No need to go out of the engine. You can change the name of the material. You can turn on back face culling, front face culling, or make this double-sided or invisible, which is a first for smileboom engine features. You can toggle whether or not this object casts a shadow or is linked to building lights. When turning on building lights, enable emissives. You can change the animation and specify the texture animation setting for the U and V axes. You can also toggle the UV step animation. This setting is used to slice a texture and treat it like a frame animation. The UV of the model must be ready to paste the first frame in advance. This function does not scale texture coordinates. You can turn on emissive blink. When the switch is turned on, if there is emissive light emission, it can be made to blink. You can change the shaders here, a physics-based extension of the non-physics-based rendering shader. It is rendered as opaque, as well as offsets, roughness, metallicness, and specularity. And all of these changes will be immediately applied in the preview. If I wanted to change the metallic for this altar, for example, from 0 to 1, it would become completely metallic, at least as far as its material properties were concerned. We could change the specular to 1 and the roughness to 1, and that would change its characteristics slightly. We could also change these to 0 with the roughness set to 0 and the metallic at 1, specular at 1. This appears extremely polished and metallic. Obviously, those surfaces would look way different depending on the rest of the map in which this was placed. There would be a lot of reflection. We set the metallic back to 0, and we have our flat model once again. Here's another one with metallic set to 1 and specular to 1, roughness 0. Looking really cool. Finally, we have the textures under 3D stamps, and we can view the textures right here in the engine. No need to leave to look at a third-party program just to view the textures, or looking around in our Explorer. We can view the normals and albedos, and this is our confirmation that RPG developer BAKIN does support normal maps, albedo maps, mask maps, shadow maps, and we've already seen that it supports specular, metallic, and roughness properties. So for texture settings, we can change the name, as always. We can also change the shapes, 2D, cube, 3D. Not sure what the difference would be just yet. Perhaps it just affects the preview. We could turn on or off the sRBG setting. Textures uses color information. Must be sRBG. So please turn this on for such textures. 3D settings. Its usage is default, normal, or 2D, and whether or not to compress it. Turning this on would be effective when using large-sized textures. And you have settings for how this texture will be sliced, wrapped, and filtered. Next, we have 2D stamps, an entire category all its own. And we've just selected one, the Vivace 2D stamp. We have a list of the different animations included with this character. We have the ability to assign a tag. In this case, the 2D tag is applied to this character. We can pause and play the animations. We can display or hide any specified collision. For this 2D stamp, we can change the name and basic parameters such as graphic, subgraphic, accurate collision, and this effectively gives it the same collision options as a 3D object, and whether or not it overwrites non-traversable terrain. So you can use bridges that are made up of 2D sprites instead of 3D models if you wish, or 2D airships, that's another use case that I forgot to mention, or ships or other vehicles, other types. You can change the accurate collision setting here as well using the physics settings if you desire. Under 2D stamps, we have slice animation. This allows you to specify the different animations for the 2D models. In this case, we can change the scale and the vertical billboard or no billboard processing, the name of the motion, and exactly what file is being referenced. For tile set purposes, it looks like the 2D sprites follow a facing down, left, then up, then right convention. You can specify the playback speed of the animation and whether it loops. A couple more animations, this one of the zombie. Here is the golem, and there are many more. The sprites category allows us to create and manage sprite data. Sprites in this context being overlay images. So for example, we have different 2D effects, title screens, UI, character busts, menu animations, and more. So just to kind of preview what this means, we have an event effect of the threatening JoJo sound, the go, 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 go. And we can play this, and it will play the animation. We can set this to loop so we can watch it a little bit more. And we see that this motion is called shaking. And if we click concentration line, we have another animation of the concentration lines, I suppose these are called. It looks like a popular manga convention when we're trying to draw attention to the target. And the target indeed is specified here by this black sphere that says target. So we could stop the playback. We can change the preview scale. We can make that a little bit easier to see. Let's click on the cave keeper and play his animation so that he's able to talk and blink at us. And we'll stop and click on the event and play that animation. Looks like he keeps his eyes closed for that one. So we have powerful animation tools here. We can turn the layout number on the preview on or off for each of the objects that are displayed. We can turn the default target image on or off as well. We could change what that default target means. We could use a different background if you don't like the checkered background here. All non-essential stuff, but quality of life features. And the edit button, when clicked, brings us to a very familiar screen for those of us who have worked in Smile Game Builder. This is an entire animation sprite tool that we can use, and this is going to have to be a video in and of itself. So we'll do that another time. For now, under 2D stamps, we'll navigate to images, and now this appears to allow us all to see all of the static images, or actually all of the resources, period, that are in the game. We have access to a ton of different sprites, character faces, busts. I love this character. I don't see Marie anywhere in here. That's my only gripe. But I can tell that I'm going to have a new favorite if I don't find Marie. At the very least, this will be my second favorite. For these, we can change the name as well as the shape. We can see what the image X and Y size is, and number of bits, otherwise the color depth, and image file type. We see a lot of the same settings that we've seen in previous menus with slicing and UV wraps expansion method. Next up, finally a new category, we have sounds in the resource menu. This allows us to see the waveforms of the various sounds and test play them. And it looks like we have a lot of the same sounds that came with Smile Game Builder. These we can change the name of. We can see what the sampling rate is, number of channels, the length. We can change the type from sound effect to environmental sound to BGM. We can specify whether or not to use a loop, and if so, where is the start and end point, as well as the volume. Sounds, like everything else I've seen so far, have management tags that can be added. Next, we have movies. It's another first for the smileboom team. They've given us the ability to use MP4s. We have confirmation in the included splash screen. This was powered by KMY or Kimmy. This is smileboom's game engine. Same engine they used to create Smile Game Builder. We can change the name of the movie, and we can check the file name and folder, and we do know that this is a .mp4 file. We can also provide our movies with management tags. Finally, we have system resources. This is where a lot of the game options are going to be. We have a menu that basically looks a lot like the Edit Game Data menu of Smile Game Builder, at least under the Settings section. We can decide various system sound effects here for things like decide, cancel, text entry, escape succeeded, skill usage, system BGM settings for game over, battle, when battles are won, when you stay at ends, screen transition effects when you enter or leave maps or start or finish battles, menu windows, selection backgrounds and selection frames, icons for current page position, and player icon on the simplified map, the different button icons used for text entry, the icons used for escape, going back a menu, and new, and during battles, the numbers for damage, foot effect on turns. This actually specifies the effects to be displayed beneath the cast whose turn it is during the battle, so you can specify how that selector looks. It doesn't have to be a white glowing square anymore. The skill chanting effect. Specify the effect to be displayed beneath the cast during skill chanting. And that was a complete overview of the resources menu in RPG Developer BAKIN. I hope you enjoyed this overview. We'll be taking a look at the game definition menu next. That is sure to be a ton of fun. For now, have a fantastic day. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.